What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Chip.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm confused right now. I'm really confused. I don't know what to think. I don't know what conclusions to draw. I don't have all the facts. I don't know what side of the argument to come down on. All I can share, all I can say, all I can conclude is, from my perspective, my own opinions, how I see it. Syria is completely fucked. If you didn't know, there has been a Syrian civil war that has been raging for the better part of 5 years now. And as we see in media recently, there has been an influx of refugees seeking asylum in various countries, particularly in the EU. When I look at this situation, I don't know how much of what I've concluded is actually true. Okay? I have no idea. I don't know. All I know is this. Assad, maybe not the best guy, but he's there, right? Democratically elected, third term in office, re-elected during war. While war is raging in his country, he is re-elected. What is going on over there? Why are we seeking to depose Assad? That's the big question I have. Why? Is it because he doesn't play ball with U.S. interests? Is it because he doesn't play ball with the Saudis or the Israelis? Why are we so intent on destabilizing and seemingly so intent on destabilizing and continuing to destabilize Syria? To what end? Okay? We are now, I think as early as 2012, maybe 2012, maybe 2013. I'm not sure exactly when the first U.S. airstrike in Syria was. American-led intervention. Here it is. August 12th. Okay, 2015. So it was this year. We basically said to the Assad regime, you have a fucked up situation that's ongoing in your country. Maybe not due to your actions, but nonetheless, your country is being used in many parts as training facilities or safe harbor for Daesh, however you pronounce that, otherwise known as ISIL or ISIS. What are you going to do about it? Obviously, not much. So we're going to step in. We're going to attack these targets within your country. My question that I'm posting to Quora, and I saw a response to that, was... First, I'll read my question. What is the nature of the agreement, if any, that exists between the government of Syria Assad, democratically elected, and the United States to be able to legally carry out military operations against Daesh in Syria. What is the nature of the agreement? Is there a standing agreement? And I looked on the internet. No, there's no fucking standing agreement. We are wholesale ignoring, again, the sovereignty, the sovereign borders of a sovereign nation to do whatever the fuck we want because we think it's within the interests of the greater good of the world. And who is making that determination? We have the UK, Belgium, and conveniently, a number of Gulf states. Who stands to benefit? Let's look at this. Russia and Iran and Syria and I don't know who else in that region. But they have a vested interest in seeing the immediate cessation of hostilities inside Syria. A number of times, okay, now more than once, chemical weapons have been deployed in Syria. Initially, Assad was blamed. For using the chemical weapons. There was a UN investigation. It was concluded that there was no conclusive proof on either side that either Assad nor the ISIS rebels were responsible for the fucking chemical attacks. We have a line being fed to us, okay, that, there are moderate rebel groups operating inside Syria whom we are trying to assist, right? There are moderate Al-Qaeda. There are moderate ISIS or Daesh. Moderate fighters. Moderate extremists. No, there are no moderate extremists. I don't know that for a fact. There could be, but they are a very small minority, and there have been, at least on one occasion, and I believe it's multiple times, there have been instances in which the so-called moderates who we've funded, who CIA has personally assisted with training, but maybe personnel, materiel, where they have turned around and joined fucking ISIS. The myth of the moderate Syrian rebel group that the US, that CIA, let's be honest, this is all CIA. It says the hallmarks of the worst, most botched, most poorly managed, most half-baked CIA operation in history, at least in recent history. It has all of the hallmarks of being a complete fucked up op. We're presumably funding these moderate rebel groups in Syria. They're turning around and joining ISIS. That leads me to one possible conclusion, that we aren't looking to support any type of moderate group inside Syria. We're only looking to destabilize, and we use this moderate rebel narrative as lip service to justify continuing to arm this radical, psychopathic group of killers. Not killers, of murderers. Of insane murderers. I won't go so far as to say, as some have conjectured in the past with Al-Qaeda, that the entire organization of Daesh is a CIA operation. I think there was the germ of something like honestly extremist, honestly Muslim. But I think for the overwhelming majority of the material support is coming from countries who, by day, espouse no support and no friendliness towards Muslim extremism, but by night do everything in their power to ensure that they continue to be able to operate, that they continue to be able to be funded, that they continue to be armed, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, like, and this won't be popular, like Israel. Is Israel responsible in some part for the rise and emergence and persistence of Daesh? Well, who does it benefit? Who stands to benefit from a destabilized Syria? It's obviously not Assad, right? It's not the democratically elected leader of Syria. Who stands to benefit? Well, for some time, Israel, has been at odds with Iran, right? Israel has been at odds with Iran. Okay. Who's Iran friends with? Well, Iran's friends with Syria. Okay. So, the friend of my enemy is my enemy, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. There's this strange diplomatic arrangement, this strange diplomatic coincidence of interests that exists between the nation states of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Israel. So, the continued and further destabilization of Syria, who does that benefit? Well, it's not Assad, and if Assad is friends with Iran, and Iran is the enemy of Israel, then certainly destabilizing Syria and continuing to see it destabilized and continuing to push for regime change in the form of the quote-unquote moderate rebels who, point of fact, are not moderate at all, as I've stated, though there might be some hints of the moderates there within the rebel factions. I know that there's been infighting before. So, yeah, there's probably some less crazy psychopathic group. But for the most part, no, right? So who does it benefit, right? It benefits Saudi Arabia to see Assad fall. It benefits Israel to see Assad fall. And by extension, all of these refugees that are leaving Syria, okay, these peace-loving Syrians who've done nothing except have their homeland turned into a war zone by competing international interests. And because I don't have the evidence, and gray is white, I can't openly accuse any group or any side of wrongdoing because we just don't know. Like I said at the start, at the top of the podcast, I'm confused. I don't know who is on which fucking side. All I fucking know is that when I look at the news, I see the refugees, I know that the Kurds are fighting ISIS. I know that Assad is fighting ISIS. I hear that the U.S. is fighting ISIS within Syria. I have to wonder, why are we prosecuting a war inside the sovereign borders of a nation? It's because, they say, it's no mystery that the U.S. does not favor an Assad regime. That's been made excruciatingly clear in the media. Kind of in the lead up going into this. Then all of a sudden, the rebel groups in Syria metastasized and joined in some way with the nascent ISIS movement in Iraq, and then you had this full-blown cancer kind of attacking the entire region. It's so confusing. What do I know? The Kurds are fighting ISIS. Turkey was letting ISIS fighters pass through its border. Turkey was maybe, I have to stop at conjecture because I don't know. All I can do is ask questions. Was Turkey supplying arms to ISIS at any point between 2010 and 2015 today? Well, I know that they were allowing them to pass unhindered into northern Iraq, into northern Syria, where the Kurds are. And I've never met a Kurd in my life. All I've seen is on Vice documentaries. All I've seen is on BBC reports. I've heard. This is all I've seen of the Kurdish people. But I think they are a good people. Now, the PKK has been accused of terrorist attacks within southern Turkey, but Turkey has had a historically rocky relationship with the Kurds, and I don't know who threw the first stone. I'm confused. I need someone out there. All I can do is educate my listeners to the best of my ability. It is a spider web. It is a tangled spider web. Who's on what side? What interests are being fought for and by whom? It's confusing. We destabilized Iraq, courtesy of George W. Bush in Operation Iraqi Freedom. The Iraqi state collapsed on itself. We had the emergence of a number of different groups who rose to kind of fill the power vacuum, and we've done our best to try and prop up a government in that country, which has since lost ground to ISIS. I'd like to think that, yes, it's all CIA. CIA is responsible for everything. They are the spycraft, the statecraft geniuses who are the architects of the rise of ISIS and are behind all of the destabilization efforts within Syria. But I know that they're not even that competent that they could do something like that. There were obviously these groups, this ISIS existed as a germ already within the collapsing state of Iraq. And, I mean, it's clear, the record shows that there were arms shipments that were ending up in the arms of Daesh, of ISIS fighters. We'd arm them, and then for the television cameras, we would blow them up. And this is kind of what we've been doing. And it's hard to see, well, you know, where do the allegiances lie? Who are these people? It's said that ISIS is comprised, I don't know what percentage, but a sizable number of ISIS fighters are from Europe or are from elsewhere in the world that have gone there to fight. In some cases, you have ethnically white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, or Caucasians who have converted to Islam and have taken flights back to Syria, back to Iraq, or back to elsewhere in the region, namely Turkey, and then kind of being spirited across the border by Turkish border patrol into Syria to fight in this kind of like reverse crusade, this reverse obverse in like I don't even have the language to describe the geometrical flip necessary to appropriately characterize what is happening there, right? But they're coming here to fight the reverse anti-jihad crusade, the reverse anti-crusade, right? It's so bizarre. It's so incredibly bizarre. It begs the question, the Middle East, what the fuck is wrong with that fucking place? Thousands of years of recorded history of people living in that area of the world. And there is so much conflict. You also wonder, what the fuck happened in the Middle East somewhere between 1950 and present day, where you have this rise, this resurgence and extremist ideology in your Wahhabist Islam, given all the room and the support that it needed to grow and metastasize in Saudi Arabia, who are supposed to be our friends. You know, the King Faisal, is that his name? The guy who kisses Bush. No, I'm sorry. The late King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, making out with Bush on White House grounds, kind of holding hands with each other. Not that there's anything wrong with two men holding hands or kissing, but when you're holding the hand of the man whose country in which 15 of the 19 hijackers who brought down the World Trade Center and the supposed mastermind of the operation, Osama bin Laden, call home. This is where they were born. They are all Saudi nationals. It gives me fucking pause when I see that. What the fuck fucking happened? It's so frustrating not to know everything. But then, you start talking about issues like this, and you want to know. You want to know what happened. You have to pull on the reins too, because you can't draw conclusions. I don't know. Maybe King Abdullah was trying his hardest to prevent the surge in Wahhabist ideology within Saudi Arabia. Maybe these leaders did not have a vested interest in seeing that America be harmed on September 11th. Maybe they don't have an interest in seeing the waves and waves of refugees to whom they've denied all refugee status applications. Okay? To whom they've denied any kind of support whatsoever for the refugees. It strikes me as so strange that here we have Syria becoming so destabilized, and yet the only place that they can seem to go is the EU. It's the only place that they feel safe is the EU. They won't go to Qatar. They won't go to the UAE. They won't go to Saudi Arabia. If they're allowed into those countries, it's because there are very specific agreements that are made, where they have to commit to very low-paying jobs, and it's quite Reiki. The agreements that they have to submit to, that they have to agree to, that they have to accept. It's quite Reiki. It's quite Third Reiki. Okay? Like, oh, you can do this, you can't do that, etc., etc. It's ironic that one of the countries which is welcome the Syrian refugees with open arms happens to be Germany. It's interesting how this is playing out. Do we want to know? I don't want any of this to be part of my world. I'm kind of upset at the fact that I'm actually having to make this podcast because it's not something that I like to talk about. I don't want any of this to exist. I don't want there to be war in Syria. I don't want there to be Syrian refugees. I don't want fucking Saudi Arabia and Israel and Qatar and the UAE and Iran and Syria and now Russia to fight each other, and the US to fight one another. It fucking pisses me the fuck off. Why the fuck is it happening? Why does it continue to fucking happen? Are the borders that steel? That concrete? That there's no, like, blending of cultures? Like, for example, in the United States, you have people who live in New Hampshire who enjoy the luxury of not paying some kind of tax. I forget what it is. It's not income tax. It's sales tax. They have the luxury of living in New Hampshire, and then they carpetbag down to Massachusetts, and they work Massachusetts jobs. They take jobs, in effect, away from Massachusetts citizens, and then they get to go home. At the end of the day, they go back north, across the border, and spend their money in New Hampshire, further bolstering the New Hampshire economy. Now, New Hampshire's economy, I think, pales in comparison to Massachusetts's. So it's kind of like we turn a blind eye to it, but it's something that exists, it happens, and we don't go to war because of that. I look at a New Hampshire citizen, if I see a New Hampshire plate when I'm driving on the Mass Turnpike, I don't, like, immediately reach for my gun and look to shoot at this person in order to kill them. How concrete are these borders? Obviously, in Turkey, they're not very concrete. At least on the Turkish side or the Kurdish side. I think now it's high time that the Kurds deserve their own state. I think. Now, whether or not Turkey would be willing to accept that, I mean, it's obvious that they're not. That's why there's been the continued fighting. But I don't know. Maybe the Kurds, maybe I have them wrong. Maybe the documentaries that I've seen have portrayed them, in a better light than they deserve. Maybe they are just wanton terrorists looking to terrorize and make trouble in Turkey. But I do know that they're fighting ISIS. And I do know that Turkey is letting ISIS cross the border. In some respects, that tactic is being used in order to put pressure, continued pressure, on the Kurds. So it's very confusing. I don't know. I don't even know Assad. I mean, he's been accused of using chemical weapons. The UN investigated. They threw that out. It turned out later, just recently, matter of fact. I mean, not too recently, but within the last 3-4 months, there was another chemical attack. This one, it was clear. It was very clear that salvo had not come from Assad's regime, had not come from the Syrian National Army. That attack was born of ISIL, of Daesh, or one of the irregular insurgent rebel groups operating inside the country, which, casts this theory that Assad would dare to use chemical weapons against his own population kind of in a negative light, that earlier attack. When two groups are accused of chemical attack early in a war, and then later on in the war, one of those groups is singled out as absolutely being responsible for the chemical attack, and you kind of have to wonder about the first chemical attack. Whose responsibility was that? But I don't know. I could have this all backwards. Assad could be a butcher. He could be a tyrant of the worst order. I don't know. I'm confused. There's way too much going on there. All I know, I keep saying that, all I know right now, the U.S. requesting Greece restrict airspace to Russian military flights heading into Syria. All I know, Russian military flights are headed to Syria with Russian pilots in Russian fighter craft who will be fighting, quote-unquote, ISIL, Daesh, inside Syria. We've been bombing inside Syria. Purportedly, we've been targeting only ISIL targets. But if I was a smart tactician, if I was, what is someone called who does strategy? A strategist, right? If I was a strategist, I would use the bombing of infrastructure, vital infrastructure vital to the stability of Syria as a whole, as a country. I would use the targeting, the attacking of ISIL targets as my cause for war. That would be the camouflage behind which I would further seek to make life difficult for Assad within his country. That's what I would do. If I was looking to depose the leader of a country, tyrant or not, despot or not, democratically elected or not, and I needed some way to get in there, first I would arm a bunch of rebel groups, okay, that were kind of against Assad, all right? Assad, who happens to be, I think he's rather secular in terms of his rule. Like, you have the Sunnis and the Shia are the most, like, clearly defined ethnic groups within Islam, within the Muslim world. And then there's even more. when you drill down, there's even more. But it comes back to that basic division. And Assad, for quite some time, led kind of a secular rule, wherein, there were Sunnis in government, there were Shia in government. But he himself is Shia, right? When you trace the lineage back or whatever. All of the September 11th hijackers and Osama bin Laden were all Sunni Muslims. Keep that in mind. So what I would do if I wanted to overthrow the Assad regime in Syria, this is what I'd do. I would support these rebel groups, these irregular groups, namely comprised of Sunnis. I would radicalize them, right, using Wahhabist Islam and, Al-Qaeda-like, dreams of a new caliphate, and I would arm them surreptitiously. I would send them, vehicles, and I would let them discover weapons caches and so on and so forth. As ISIS has been, there was one report where a plumber from Texas, who I guess did some contract work in Iraq during the Iraq War, was wondering how his contract vehicle, his truck, ended up in the hands of ISIL, being used as a technical. He saw his truck on the news one day, and people dug into the story, and it turned out that yes, this was a vehicle from Texas that was now being used by ISIS fighters in Iraq, or I don't know if it was Syria at that point. But so that's what I do. I would train them also, kind of surreptitiously. I would send military trainers in there, special operations forces, to train up this insurgent force, and I would just have them just go crazy inside that country. I would arm them possibly with chemical weapons, or I would try to create a situation in which it was kind of ambiguous as to whether or not who use these chemical weapons, though I would arm them with the chemical weapons and try and set up a situation in which it looked like the leader of the country I was trying to depose, in this case Syria, that it looked like members of the standing uniformed military of that country had used those weapons against the rebels, or against the Syrians. I guess in the first attack, they weren't even, these people that the weapons were used against weren't even rebels. I mean, these were just civilians. Kind of indiscriminately fire these chemical weapons on the civilians. I would do that in order to try and begin to make an international case for full-scale intervention in that country, right? So that's what I'd do. I'd make contact with the irregulars, the insurgents, the protest groups, all right? I'd arm them, I'd supply them, I'd train them, I'd try and affect this chemical weapons attack to make it look like the leader of this country was just a terrible despot who is a madman using chemical weapons against his own people in order to drum up international support for an intervention. And if that failed, if someone from, say, in this case, Russia, came in and leapt on an opportunity that was presented by the Secretary of State to kind of avoid military action, the likes of which we saw in Iraq, right? When there was the whole drum up to the weapons with the weapons of mass destruction. If that failed and someone from like Russia avoided full-scale invasion by creating this deal in which Assad got rid of all of his chemical weapons, or agreed to destroy them all, then, what would I do? I would continue to feed the flames of ISIS, which at this point would already be burning a hole would already be burning a path through Syria. Indiscriminate warfare, women and children being targeted, the whole nine, journalists being decapitated, everything, the whole thing spiraling out of control, right? I would try to continue to control this chaos, and then when it reached a point where it was like obviously evident that the president of this country, who is having so much difficulty fighting this Frankenstein monster that I had created, that I was active in arming, training, and in helping, in supporting, I would say to the world, all right, there's this big, bad, evil force alive now in Syria, and now we're going to begin airstrikes within the borders of that sovereign nation. That's what I would do. And then I could use that as an excuse to further target infrastructure, to further make it difficult for Assad in an attempt to depose him. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, we are up to our knees in a shadow war with Russia in some respect. That's playing out here by proxy in Syria. I mean, we are not actually at war, all right? I'll tell you who does it benefit? Because really, in the United States, if Assad was in power, it really does not, it's not going to make your beer taste any better. If Assad's in power or if he's not in power, okay? This is like the incredible disconnect that exists in American foreign policy, whereby decisions are made, bodies are committed, right, in the form of the U.S. military. Money is committed in the form of U.S. taxpayer dollars to fight these fucking proxy wars, and then that we don't stand to gain from any of that. We talk about, oh, well, then Russia will get a foothold in the region, blah, blah, blah. It should not be our intention to affect global domination. We're powerful as it is just by ourselves in our country, doing what we do in places like Silicon Valley and what used to be Detroit and other places, in the colleges and the universities in Massachusetts, you know, in the agricultural centers in the Midwest and in California and Florida, in places like this, in the oil-rich places like Alaska and Texas. We have enough strength and enough power than to have to get involved in these fucking international disputes. Who gives a flying fuck who the fuck is in charge in Syria or fucking Iraq? Who gives a fuck? Nobody. No one in America should. And yet we take this moral high ground. Well, in the case of Saddam Hussein, yes, he was a terrible person, but now look at the situation. When Saddam Hussein was in power, at least he kept a leash on that fucking country. Right? There was some order there. There was civilization. There were services. Right? Were people suffering? Yes. There are people suffering all over the world. Right now, in the United States. But there was some order. Who gives a fuck over there? I'll tell you who gives a fuck. Saudi Arabia gives a fuck who's in charge in Syria. Saudi Arabia gives a fuck about a diplomatic solution to the nuclear issue in Iran. Right? Israel gives a fuck about that too, for more important reasons. I mean, the notion, if I could just address this quickly, that Iran has... The notion that any country in that region would employ the use of nuclear weapons in order to affect a kind of a military victory, kind of preemptive attack. I mean, the notion that any country in that region would employ the use of nuclear weapons in order to effect, would employ the use of nuclear weapons preemptively to effect a military victory is just, it's complete and utter nonsense. And the notion that, okay, if, the notion that a sovereign nation does not have the right to pursue nuclear weapons when another nation in that area, Israel, has had nuclear weapons for some time, is just it's a double standard. It's a double standard. Israel makes the case, or might make the case, well, yes, we have nukes, but we're different. Different how? Different how? When the world sees the images coming back from Palestine, of neighborhoods that are devastated, of the security zone, buffer zone that's been established, and all of the homes that have been bulldozed and destroyed. Now let's be clear, in that conflict, Israel's not alone, okay? You have Hamas and Hezbollah. I think most recently Hezbollah. That could be wrong. Could be Hamas. Firing rockets, Katyusha rockets, indiscriminately into Israel. That's pretty shitty too. When you think of and you consider the rocket attacks in Israel, and you trace the money, who is funding this? Who is funding this? Was it Syria? No, it wasn't Syria. Where were the missiles coming from? The missiles are Katyusha rockets. Well, the missiles were coming to Palestine by way of who? By way of Iran, by way of Russia, via Iran, via Syria, via in some instances maybe Egypt. I don't know. Egypt's kind of a wild card right now. When you think about what's happening with Palestine, a country which still I don't think has been recognized. Like, why isn't it recognized? We're setting up this arbitrary path to statehood as opposed to recognizing the territory. I love how it's referred to as just a territory in international, global policy nomenclature. It's the Palestinian territory. It's not really a country. No, motherfucker, it's an actual country. Okay? These people identify, they have a flag. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's a fucking country. When you look at Hamas does not benefit the Palestinians. Hezbollah does not benefit the Palestinians. There is no way ever, it will never happen that Hezbollah or Hamas, by extension the Palestinians, will defeat Israel militarily. It will never happen. Give it up. Palestine, Hamas, Hezbollah, it's never going to happen. You will never defeat Israel militarily. And I think many Palestinians know this. They realize this. And yet there are still these extremist elements within the Palestinian territories that are trying to, attack Israel with these rockets. So you try and follow the money. Well, where's the money coming from? The money for those rockets is coming almost singularly from Qatar. Now, in public, Qatar and Israel have kind of a jovial little kind of friendship going, or they had for some time. Though, when word of the funding, now I could be wrong with this, okay? This might be conjecture on my part, but last I heard, Hezbollah or Hamas was almost singularly funded by Qatar, and Qatar was in good standing with Israel. So it makes you wonder, what is happening? What is that dynamic that's taking place between Israel and Palestine, whereby Israelis are able to maintain positive diplomatic relations with a country who's actively involved in trying to fund those who wish to destroy it? And I have a theory on that. Of course, this all has to be, vetted, all right? This is all just conjecture. I want to make it clear. I should put a disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast. This is all conjecture. I have no idea. I'm confused. I did say it at the top of the program, didn't I? I'm confused. I don't know what to believe. I'm looking for answers. If you have answers, please, by all means, I'd love to be corrected. I'm a scientist. I enjoy being corrected. It's how I live my life. When I look at that situation, I see it as a convenient means by which Israel can continue to kind of lay claim to or erode the Palestinian state until it's basically nothing. What they do is they have an ally, in the case of Qatar, who's arming the Palestinian rebel groups, or not rebel groups, but the militant groups, right? Mossad knows exactly what kind of weapons, in what quantity, right? I mean, Israel's military is, like, for its size, is probably the most futuristic, sophisticated, and effective military, in large part due to the United States. I mean, we can take credit for that the world has ever seen, right? They know exactly how many rockets, where they're being fired, where they're being trafficked. There are probably GPS devices hidden in them that Mossad or Israeli military intelligence was tracking. They know exactly where these things are going. But just like Churchill in World War II, if you go ahead and intercept those U-boats that are going to sink that British steamliner, you're going to be giving away the fact that you've broken the code, that you broke the Enigma code, right? So what do? You use Iron Dome to destroy, most of the missiles. You allow a few of them to hit inside the country, and that gives you the casus belli, right? You need the cause. I needed to look that up real quick with the correct pronunciation. The casus belli, which is Latin for the cause for war, right? You need a justification. You can't just go in there with bulldozers into Palestine and start knocking over houses for no reason whatsoever. So you get these you have this arrangement with Qatar. They get them to fire the missiles. You go in. You can now establish the security perimeter and further erode the Palestinian state. You're going to have to weather whatever kind of international disagreement or criticism that might be leveled against you. But the Israelis are hardened to this now. There's very little that would change the mind. I'm talking about the stereotypical right-wing Israeli. And unfortunately, from an outsider's view looking in, that's almost all of Israelis are comprised of these radicalized, right-wing, extremist, war hawk people. And then on the other side, I guess the left wing, you'd have like the Orthodox Jews who refuse to fight or serve in the military and are their own special kind of crazy. What I'm praying for, I say praying loosely, what I'm hoping for are, where is the peaceful, I would hope to think, majority, moderate Israelis who don't espouse a radicalized belief in Jehovah and don't see Israel as like the fulfillment of some kind of crazy philosophy, crazy prophecy from ancient times. Where are the peace-loving Israelis like Uri Geller who are critical of these actions, who can kind of see it, who would be looking for a one-state solution? And also, conversely, where are those Palestinians, those peace-loving Palestinians? They shouldn't be allowing not Mossad. I said Mossad. It's kind of that's a Freudian slip there. Mossad, not Mossad, but Hamas. They should not be allowing Hamas to operate out of their neighborhoods. The only way that Palestine will ever see peace, the only way that Palestine will ever see victory is through non-violent, non-military, peaceful, pacifistic means. They need to take a page out of Gandhi's book and use that. That's the only way that they are going to win victory. They will never, ever, ever win against Israel in a stand-up military engagement. They will die 10 times out of 10. They will always die. They will always lose. If they bring weapons to a fight, if they come wanting to fight with Israel, they're going to die. That needs to be made clear. But if I was Israel and I was I wanted to conquer more of, I wanted to win by conquest more of the quote-unquote Palestinian territory, that's what I would do. I'd have my buddy Qatar fund them, right? Give them the money. And I would wait for the rockets to rain down. My Iron Dome would take out some of them. I'd have to let some of them pass. And I'd make it look to the world like I can stand it until I can't stand it no more. And then I would go in with the bulldozers and the guns and the airstrikes and just completely decimate the Palestinians. That's what I would do. A lot of foreign policy today. A lot of unanswered questions. A lot of mysteries. We want to know. People want to know. The only reason that I talk about this shit is because it's happening. I really don't want to talk about it. There are more important things to talk about. But this is like part of that, right? The future of humanity. The future of the world. I don't know how many of you listened to my rant against Ryan Faith, senior defense and security editor for Vice News. But I was pretty pissed off because I saw what he was doing as kind of a disservice to people, a disservice to the world, trying to drum up support for a Chinese-U.S. conflict. Now I'm wondering, in light of this whole Russian-Greek airspace, Russia in Syria military buildup, I'm wondering if that wasn't kind of premature, that maybe Faith wasn't operating by a more shrewd logic that I was just kind of ignorant of. Because maybe drumming up support for a U.S.-Chinese military conflict might give pause to everything that's happening in the Middle East. It might get everyone to just shut the fuck up and get along, because there were two juggernauts who are on the edge of getting into a full-blown global conflict. Maybe I was too hasty. I saw it, and you can view the video yourself. We're at the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to wrap up now. But I saw it as he was doing a disservice, and this is a pattern of this happening on part of Ryan Faith. And I don't know how much I can really blame him, because he's reporting the news as it is, but it's, from where I stand, it's markedly tinged with agenda. Like, it's very clear, kind of, what his position is. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I was pissed off because I felt like I was being led down a debate which was framed kind of unfairly, to frame it in this sense of that conflict between these two nations is inevitable. I hold to the idea, my personal philosophy, that conflict is never inevitable, but it's going to exist. So I haven't really thought up the quote for this. What do I say? Conflict is inevitable, but it doesn't have to, but people don't have to die. How's that? Conflict is inevitable, but people don't have to die, or to lose face, or to lose their quality of life, or where they are. Okay? We have enough conflict with post-scarcity economics and the robot takeover and so on and so forth, than to have to worry about, each other taking the food out of one another's mouth. There's no call for that. There's no cause. Anyway, I hope that something good comes out of this. I hope we get some answers. If I pissed you off, I'm really sorry. I'm a noob when it comes to foreign policy. All I do is read the New York Times and random blogs on my news feed. So, if you can educate me, I would appreciate it. Again, this has been Busy reporting to you from Osaka, Japan. If you'd like to contribute to what we have going on here, I would encourage you to PayPal us at getrealbusy@gmail.com. We appreciate all of your support. We couldn't do it without you. I do get a little emotional when it comes to this, but if people's lives hang in the balance, what better thing is there to get emotional about? Okay? So, I'm wishing you the best. Thank you very much for listening. Tune in next time. World peace.